How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're sending Daf 8 of Pesach Zevachim. Friends, on Daf 8, we talk about Korbin Chatas' Lishmah requirement. Yesterday at the end of the Daf, at the end of Daf Zion, the last, I wouldn't say the second half, maybe the last third or so, we discussed, of course, in our Mishnah, we had said that while all the karbanos kol azvachim shnizbuchu shelo lishman ksherin el shlo alu lebalim l'shem chova. The two exceptions being chatas and korban pesach. Right? Of course, by most korbanos, if they are slaughtered, let's say if any avodas are done shelo lishma, the korban is kosher, just shelo alu lebalim l'shem chova. But the exceptions being chatas and korban pesach. Yesterday we learned how we know that the korban pesach lishma is me'akev. So today we are going to do the same for the Korbin Chatas. That will be the first section of today's daf. And the second section is slaughtering a Korbin Pesach not for Pesach. And this will actually continue into tomorrow's daf. I'm going to actually stop in the middle because otherwise it's going to get quite far into tomorrow's daf. So this discusses when you have a Korbin Pesach that is slaughtered not in the small window that you have for Korbin Pesach. Of course, Korbin Pesach has to be slaughtered on the 14th day of Nisan in the afternoon. Any other time, the entire year, other than that tiny window, is considered not at its proper time. And we discussed the halachis around offering a Korbin Pesach outside of that small window. Chevre, this is what we have in store for Daf Ches of Pesach Zevachim. Here we go. Okay, we are going to begin on Daf Zayin Amid Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. Chatos min olam. How do we know that a Korbin Chatas Lishma is me'akev, that it must be done Lishma? I think maybe I've kind of gone over this. Yeah, I definitely mentioned this, clarified this, what's the word I'm thinking of? I can't think of the word that I'm thinking of. Nomenclature. But ma'akev, right, when I say ma'akev, it means that if you don't do a lishma, posel. It's ma'akev. It has to be done lishma, not lishma, posel. Ma'akev. When I say ma'akev, that's what it means. The nomenclature. Chatas b'nolan. How do we know that chatas, like a Korbin Pesach, is me'akev? Tichsiv, as the posik says, v'shochat osa l'chatas, shetei shchita l'shem chatas. So when it says v'shochat osa l'chatas, now where is this posik? V'samach yoda arosh chatas v'shochat osa l'chatas. B'imkom shishchat l'ola. I don't actually. Let me actually look this up because I want to make sure I know where this is coming from. Right. So Tosas said actually. After I stopped to look where it is, I remember Tosas actually talked about it. This is by a regular Korbin Chatas, right? By regular Korbin Chatas. There's all sorts of Korbin Chatas. There's Sa'ir Nasi, as we know about from Masechta Orius. There's also Sa'ir Avodas Kochavim. We're going to talk about today about Chatas Mitzora, Chatas Nazir. There's a million types of Korbin Chatas. This is the Chatas Chelev, a regular Korbin Chatas, and it says V'shochat osa l'chatas. You have to slaughter it lechatos as a Korbin Chatas. It has to be lishma. Shetei shchita l'shem chatas. That the slaughtering of the Korbin Chatas has to be for a Korbin Chatas. Ashkechon shchita kabbalah minot. Givaldik. So we have to slaughter the Korbin Chatas, the shame Korbin Chatas, not the shame ola or anything else. Okay, kabbalah minot. What about kabbalah sadam? Moving on. Tichsev, the pasuk says v'lokach hakohen midam hachatos shetei kabbalah l'shem chatos, and it says the kohen will take the blood of the chatos. So the taking the kabbalah sadam has to be l'shem chatos. Vashkon shchita v'kabbalah. Great. Moving on. We know that slaughtering and kabbalah sadam has to be lishma l'shem chatos. Zrika minolan. How do we know that the zrikas hadam by a Korbin Chatas must be Lishmah Makra v'chiper, and as we know, of course, v'chiper, the kapara, ki adam hu banefesh yichaper, as we've been saying that the kapara is the zrikas adam. So it says v'chiper olav hakoyin mechatoso. That shetei kapara, that the kapara, the zrikas adam, the shem chatas, has to be with the intention of a Korbin Chatas givaldig. That the zrikas adam has to be the shem Korbin Chatas. Ashkechon shinui kodesh. So now the Gemara says givaldig. We have psukim to teach that the zrika, that the shchita, that the kabbalah sadam. Now, as we learned already on Daf, I think maybe Dalet or Gimel. Let's see, where was it? Daf Dalet, Daf Gimel, somewhere. I don't think Daf Beis. I don't think, was it Daf Hey? No, I think it was probably Daf Dalet. Yes. On Daf Daled, we had learned that basically it says Kabbalah Sadam in the Lashon of Hakrova to basically link together Holacha and Kabbalah, so that just so, and therefore, once we've learned that Kabbalah Sadam has to be Lishmah, so then Holacha also has to be Lishmah. So we've learned Shchita has to be Lishmah. We learned Kabbalah and / Holacha has to be Lishmah, and we've learned Zrika Sadam has to be Lishmah. Shinui Kodesh is possible. It has to be Lishmah. It can't be for any other Korbin. Moving on. Shinui Bailim Minolan. Okay. Now that we've proven Shinui Kodesh, what about Shinui Bailim? Amarka, Allah. It says V'chiper Allah. HaKoyin. Allah v'lo chaver. On him and not on his friend. And as we, what is that? As we know, V'chiper olav. So as we know, as we've said a second ago, kapara is zrika is the dam, is the zrika sadam. So v'chiper olav hakoin olav v'locha al chaveru. So the kapara, the zrika sadam, has to be olav and not for his friend. So we see at least that the zrikas adam, right, that shinui bailim is possible by zrikas hadam. So askechon the mitzvah, okay, so we see that the mitzvah, right, as opposed to la'akev, we talked about it a few minutes ago, that la'akev means posel. The mitzvah means, in our context, it means that you have to do it. If you don't do it, it's not going to be ol l'balim shem chova, but the korban is still kosher. So the mitzvah means the chatchila, let's say, you could say, so the mitzvah, okay, so the mitzvah is the chatchila, la'akev is b'diavad / posel, so the mitzvah, the chatchila, the mitzvah. So ashkechol the mitzvah. So when we say v'chiper olav hakoin, that the zrika sadam has to be for him and not his friend, so that's the mitzvah. How do I know it's also me'akev by the chatos, that otherwise it's posel? La'akev minalan k'da amr of Huna B'der Yeshua, as of Huna B'der Yeshua is going to say in another context in about 10 lines from now. Chatos. So it could have said chatos, but it says v'chiper olav hakoin me'chatos. It could have said me'chatos, but it says me'chatos so. So chatas chatosos achanami chatas. So just like before, Funa B'der Yeshua says chatas chatosos, here also it could have said chatas, but it says chataso, his and not his friends. Give all the chever. So who can tell me what we have so far? What we have so far is that by shinui kodesh, that l'shem chatas and not l'shem any other korban, we have the whole gamut. We have shchita, kabbalah, holacha, zrika. When it comes to shinui bailim, we have Zrika Sadam. Now, interestingly, when it came to Shinui Kodesh, which we had the whole gamut, Shchita, Kabbalah, Holacha, Zrika, but we only had it Lemitzvah, right? We had one pasuk for each, saying you have to do Shchita Lishma, Kabbalah, Holacha Lishma, Zrika Lishma, etc. That was Lemitzvah. We haven't yet learned by Shinui Kodesh that it's Me'akev. We haven't yet learned that it's Me'akev by Shinui Kodesh. Now, when it comes to Shinui Bailim, we only have Zrika, right? V'chiper alav hakoyin alav v'lo al chaveru. So by shinui bailim, we have only v'chiper, we have only Zrika sadam, but there we have it both, not only the mitzvah but also the akev, right? We say v'chiper alav v'lo al chaveru, hakoyin al chataso v'lo chatas, right? V'lo shel chaveru. So okay. So when it comes to shinui kodesh, we know all of the avodas limitzvah. And when it comes to Shinui Bailim, we know only Zrika Sadam, but Lemitzvah and La'akev. So it says the Gemara, Ashkechon Mitzvah b'shinui kodesh. So we know that, as I just explained, that by shinui kodesh, by the whole gamut, shchita, kabbalah, halacha, zrika, limitzvah, but we don't know la'akib, uzrika b'shinui bailim, and when it comes to shinui bailim, we know zrika sadam bein lemitzvah, bein la'akib, both lichatchila and b'di'evid. La'akib b'chol avodes b'shinui kodesh, uv'shar avodes b'shinui bailim, bein mitzvah, bein la'akib minolan. So now, how do we learn the missing pieces? What are the missing pieces? Well, the whole gamut by Shinui Kodesh Le'akev. Comes to Shinui Kodesh, we need to learn out Kabbalah, Shchita, Kabbalah, Halacha, Zrika, that is Ma'akev, that we haven't learned out. And when it came to Shinui Bailim, we know Zrika, Lemitzvah, and La'akev, but we don't know Shchita, Kabbalah, Halacha at all. So how do we know this stuff? Rabbi Yena says, Rabbi Yena, Asya mechatos nazir, okie dokie. So Rabbi Yona suggests that we learn it out from the chatos nazir. We're going to reject this, and we're then going to suggest that we learn it out from the chatos mitzora. We're going to reject that as well. But we are, okay, so I just kind of wanted to give you what's going on. So we introduce here Chatas Nazir. That a Nazir, when he is done being a Nazir, right? A Nazir, of course, makes a Neder Naziris. He says, I'm going to be a Nazir. Stam Naziris is Shloshim Yom, as we know. At the end of the 30 days, let's assume it's a Stam Naziris. At the end of the 30 days, part of what he's got to do is he's got to bring 3 Korbanis. That is a Chatas, an Ola, and a Shlamim, I believe. So, I believe it is a chatas, an ola, and a shlam. So, now, when the nazir brings a chatas, the thing is with the chatas of a nazir, it isn't actually a, like, Korbin Chatas. He didn't do something that is chayiv karis, right? It's not a chatas chaylev. But, anyways, I don't remember if that is part of the rejection here, but it's going to come up in the next few days. But anyway, so here we go. We're trying to learn out, how do we know the missing pieces, right? By Shinui Kodesh and by Shinui Bailim, whatever isn't right by Shinui Kodesh, Shchita, Kabbalah, Halacha, Zrika, Le'akev, and by Shinui Bailim, Shchita, Kabbalah, Halacha, Bein Lemitzvah, Bein Le'akev. How do we know these things? So again, Rabbi Yona, says Rabbi Yona, Asya Mechatos Nazir, well, we learn it out from the Korbin Chatas that the Nazir brings as part of his purification, as part of his, as part of his commencement exercises. The Pasuk says, V'hikriv ha-kohen lifnei Hashem, okay, and the kohen brings before God, v'asa es chatoso v'esolaso, and the kohen does his chatos and his olah, shu kol asiyosov l'shem chatos. Okay, there you go. Right, it says v'asa es chatoso, that all of the asa-ing, all of the asiyos, all of the actions, all of the doings, whether that be Shchita, Kabbalah, Halacha, Zrika, all of them, Kol Asiyosef, has to be the Shem Chatos. Has to be for a Chatos. So there you go. That's the second time. But we already learned that the Kabbalah, the Shchita, Kabbalah, Halacha, Zrika, we already learned at the beginning of the daf that it needs to be the Shem Chatos Limitzvah. And now we just learned Ve'osa es chatoso, that she'kol ha'tziyosov l'shem chatos. We learned it nachamol, that all of the doings of the chatas have to be for a chatas. So shina la'akev, right? It repeated it a second time to say not only is a mitzvah, but it's also me'akev. It's also v'di'ebed. It'll be possible if you don't do it lishma. That's ashkechon shinui Kodesh. Oh, okay. So we've just completed the puzzle by Shinui Kodesh. That by Shinui Kodesh, right, that it has to be Lishmah, by all of the Avodas, Shchita, Kabbalah, Halacha, Zrika, Bein Lemitzvah, Bein La'akev, Givaldig. We're golden. Shinui Bailim Minolan. Moving on. How do we know the missing pieces by Shinui Bailim? By Shinui Bailim we know Zrika, Bein Lemitzvah, Bein La'akev. How do we know Shchita, Kabbalah, Halacha at all? So Amar Rav Huna, Brother Yeshua, Chatos, Chatoso. Well, when it says, it could have said chatos, but it says chataso, it has to be for him. And what does Rashi say? Okay? And I guess that means all of the bailim. Okay, fine. We're going to end up rejecting this. I mean, it's kind of a fun, right? Like what exactly okay, but the assumption for now at least seems to be that chataso, right? It could have said chatas, but it says chataso. And therefore, that means it has to be for him, right? Shinui bailim is also, and that's for all of the avodas. Shchita, Kabbalah, Halacha, Zvika. Maskif Ravina. Ravina asks a question. If you remember the pasuk that we read, what is it? What does the pasuk say by Chatas Mitzorah? It says, I'm backing up about 10 lines to read the pasuk. Wait, no, I'm backing up about 5 lines to read the pasuk. V'ikriv ha'kohen lifnei Hashem v'aseh chatoso v'eso laso. Right, we just made a whole drasha of chatas, chataso, but 2 words later it says olaso, his ola. So Maskiv Ravina, so Ravina asks, Ela me'ata olaso my darshas bay. Well then what are you learning from olaso? Are you learning that from chatos, chataso, that shinui bailim is ma'akev bein the mitzvah, bein la'akev, by the Korbin Chatas of Mitzorah? What are you learning out from olaso? Well, the Ravina, now according to Ravina's question that he's concerned about olaso, let me ask you another question. The very next pasuk, I believe. Yes, the very next pasuk says, I'm going to read the pasuk, but it says, Zevach Shlomim, oh, Gevalik, it's a Shlomim, right? So it's a Chatas, Ola, and a Shlomim. Hashem Asaz, Mazva, Oza, HaKohen has Minchaso, Ves Nisko. The very next pasuk, so in addition to this pasuk saying Chataso and Olaso, and Ravina says, okay, so you learned out from the Chataso, what do you do with the Olaso? The Gemara says, and Ravina, what about the fact that also, why'd you leave out the fact in your questioning? You left out the fact that in the very next pasuk, it also says, Minchaso, Nesech Nisko, right? It says Minchaso, it says Nisko. So why don't you also ask about it? Could have said Minchas, but it says Minchaso. Could have said Nesech, it says Nisko. What about those? My darshas bu, what do you learn from those? Well, Aumi Baile, that's needed. Minchasim v'niskeim balayla, Minchasim v'niskeim afil l'macha. Okay, this is a drasha that we're going to learn in other places, but apparently from Minchasim v'niskeim, we learn out that they can even be at night, they can even be the next day. Okay, so mincha. Okay, so from Minchaso and Nisko, we learn out that it can even be done at night or the next day. Olaso my tashas who, but still the question remains: what do you learn from olas? Olas we learn it from chataso the pashinu bailim ben la'akev ben the mitzvah ben la'akev. What do we learn out from olas? Olas of a su, and more so. Mi gamri me'adade. Can we really learn out a chatas chelev from a chatas mitzorah? Right? We had learned at the beginning of the daf that by a chatas chelev, right, the very beginning of the daf, we're quoting psukim, v'shachat osu lechatos, right, and then we had v'lokach hakohen midam chatas, etc. So we had learned that by chatas chelev, shchita, kabbalah, halacha, zrika, lemitzvah, that it has to be the shem, it has to be the shema. Now, where did we learn out la'akev from? From mitzorah, but chatas chelev and chatas mitzorah are incompatible. How come? Chatas chelev and chatas nazir lo gamra. You can't learn out chatas chelev from chatas nazir. Of course, chatas chelev being just a standard korban chatas that you bring for being over on a mitzvah that you're chayiv karis for, if you were to do it intentionally. For example, chelev. But you do it by accident, so you bring korban chatas. Right, so that's a chatas chelev. So we can learn out a chatas chelev from chatas nazir, which is not coming for a aver that you chayiv karis for. Shekain yesh ima domim acherim. The reason why chatas chelev cannot be learned out from chatas mitzorah is because chatas mitzorah is not chatas mitzorah. Chatas, where are we? Chatas nazir, exactly. Right. Sorry, my mistake. Chatas nazir. So chatas, we're going to get to chatas mitzorah, I believe, in a second. Chatas chelev cannot be learned out from chatas nazir because chatas nazir it has its own stringency. What's its stringency? that Chatas Nazir, the Chatas, is not brought in a vacuum. It's not brought alone. It's brought together with a Korbin Ola. It's brought together with a Korbin Shlamim. It's coming together with other Korbanos, whereas Chatas Chelev is coming alone. Chatas Nazir mechatas Chelev lo gamra, and a Chatas Nazir cannot be learned out from Chatas Chelev shekain kares, because Chatas Chelev is something that comes for a chiv kares, and therefore it's more stringent, and we can't learn out Chatas Nazir from Chatas Chelev. Elo my Ravin. Asi b'Chatas Mitzorah. So Rava suggests that, okay, well, if we're not going to learn it out from Chatas Nazir, let's learn it out from Chatas Mitzorah. And Mitzorah, as part of his purification process, he brings a Chatas, an Ola, and an Osham. So it says, V'osa akoyin es ha-Chatas, shikol ha-Siyosah, l'shem Chatas, givalding. It says that V'osa akoyin es ha-Chatas, the Asaing, the Asiyos, has to be l'shem Chatas, it has to be Lishmah, the Shchita, the Kabbalah, the Olacha, the Zrika. There you have it. So we had learned at the beginning of the Daf, the Shchita, Kabbalah, Olacha, Zrika, Lemitzvah by Shinui Kodesh, and now we are seeing it also by Chatas Mitzorah, to say that it is also Me'akev. Kol Asiyosa have to be the Shem Chatas, the Shchita, the Kabbalah, the Olacha, Zrika, the Shem Chatas, Le'akev. V'ashkechon Shinui Kodesh, Shinui Bailim Minoli, and okay, so we see that by Shinui Kodesh we got all the information we need. What about Shinui Bailim? On my Kro, the Pasuk says, V'chiper al amitoyer v'gomer al amitoyer zeh v'lo al amitoyer chavero. It says by the Chatas Mitzorah, v'chiper al hamitaher, that he will be mechaper on the one getting purified, not on his fellow, not on anybody else. Okay, vakati, but still, mi'alfa me'adadi, can we learn out Chatas Chelev from Chatas Mitzorah? Chatas Chelev mechatas Mitzorah lo yalfa. You can't learn out Chatas Chelev from Chatas Mitzorah. Why not? Shekin yeshima dab macherim, like we said earlier by the Chatas Nazir, because the Chatas Mitzorah doesn't come alone. It comes with a Ola. It comes with an Asham. Chatas Mitzorah mechatas Chelev lo gam shekin kares, and similarly, a Chatas Mitzorah cannot be learned out from a Chatas Chelev, because Chatas Chelev has a chiyuv kares. It's more stringent. So we basically had the same questions that we had on the Chatas Nazir, we add on the Chatas Mitzorah. All right, so still, we are back to square one. We need to figure out that by a Korbin Chatas, Shchita, Kabbalah, Olacha, Zrika, by Shinui Kodesh is Me'akev. We don't know that yet. And by Shinui Bailim, Shchita, Kabbalah, Olacha, at all. We don't know anything about those. We know by Zrika, by Shinui Bailim, Bein the mitzvah, ben akev, but we don't know anything else by Shinui Bailim. Now the Gemara says something interesting, which I don't fully kind of get, but chada mechada lo seotezi chada me tarte. Okay, so we were unable to learn. I wouldn't say I don't get it, but it's kind of like a funny. I get it. We'll see it. Chada mechada lo asa. So we were unable to learn out. Right, Chatas Chelev from Chatas Mitzorah or from Chatas Nazir. What about if we learn out one from two? What if we learn out one from two? Which would mean that we'd only need things to be written in, meaning we have three scenarios now, right? We have Chatas Chelev, we have Chatas Mitzorah, and we have Chatas Nazir. So technically we would only need for Shinu Bailim and Shinu Kodesh to be written by two of them, and then we'll learn the third from the two that have, meaning if it's written in two places, then we'll have Bein, one place will be the mitzvah, the other place will be Ma'akev, and then the third instance we'll learn from the other two, that if by the other two it's the mitzvah and Ma'akev, so we'll learn out the third from those two. So now, Behei lo lichtov. Okay, fine. So if we're saying that that Shinu Kodesh, Shinu Bailim should be written by 2 of 3, and the third will be learned out from 2. So which one should be the one without anything? Which is the one that will be learned out from the other 2? If we say, okay, fine, you know what? Don't write anything by Chatas Chelev. And learn that Chatas Chelev, it needs to be Lishmah, essentially, from Chatas Mitzorah and Chatas Nazir. The thing is, we said, yeah, but both by Chatas Nazir and by Chatas Mitzorah, they're coming together with other Korbanos. Masha'en Kein by Chatas Chelev. Lo lichtov Rachmana b'Chatas Nazir, v'tesi Hanoch. If we don't write anything by Chatas Nazir, and we learn it out from Chatas Chelev and Chatas Mitzorah, but Mala Hanach Shekein Ein La She'ela. But the thing is, Chatas Nazir is more lenient in a sense from Chatas Chelev and Chatas Mitzorah, in that, as we know, from learning Masechta Nedarim, from learning Masechta Nazir, a Naziris is just a type of neder. It's a neder Naziris. You could do Ataris Nedarim, and you can undo it, and then you don't have to bring the Korbanos B'chla. So therefore, we can't learn it. So maybe there isn't this requirement of the Shema by Chatas Nazir. Okay, what if we don't write anything by Chatas Mitzorah, and we'll want to learn it out from Chatas Chelev and Chatas Nazir? By Chatas Mitzorah, there's an option to bring it Bedalus, which I believe is a meal offering, is a mincha. Right? If you can't afford the more expensive Mitzorah offering, you could bring a more affordable Mitzorah offering. So, therefore, maybe Mitzorah would not be learned out from Nazir and Chatas Chelev. No, Shish. Hi, friends, how are you? How you doing? We are still trying to figure out how we know that by a Korbin Chatas, right, as we know from Daf Beis, Korbin Chatas, Shelo Lishma, Pasul. How do we know this? We are still trying to figure this out. Ella, Gom, Ella, Omar, Kra. Rather, friends, what does the Pasuk say? Friends, what does the Pasuk say? The Pasuk says the same thing as it said yesterday, and the same thing as it said on Daf, I don't know, maybe Gimel Amud Beis? Daled Amud Beis? Daf Daled Amud Beis. It says, Zos ator la'ola v'lamincha v'gomer, that the Pasuk says that this, Zos ator, I'm reading the Pasuk, Zos ator la'ola lamincha v'lachatos v'lashim v'lamilum v'lezevach hashlamim. Everything is compared to a Korbin Shlamim. It's like we had seen yesterday. Hekisho akasuv l'shlamim, the Pasuk compares a Korbin Chatas to a Korbin Shlamim. Ma Shlamim Bein Shinui Kodesh, Bein Shinui Bailim, Ba'inon Lishman Lim Mitzvah. Av Chatas Bein Shinui Kodesh, Bein Shinui Bailim, Ba'inon Lishman Lim Mitzvah. V'hilkach Mitzvah Mishlam V'anach Kroi Le'akev Givaldig. What does Rashi say? Yeah, exactly. It's the same concept as we learned by the Korbin Pesach. Basically, by the Korbin Shlamim, as we know, both by Shinui Kodesh and by Shinui Bailim, Limitzvah, right? Because by a Korbin Shlamim, if it's not Lishmah, it's still kosher, unlike Chatas and Korbin Pesach. But we learn out from Korbin Shlamim the basics, that both by Shinui Kodesh and by Shinui Bailim, it needs to be Lishmah by all of the avodas. Shchita, Kabbalah, Olacha, Zrika, they all have to be Lishma, Limitzvah, Bein B'Shinui Bailim, Bein B'Shinui Kodesh. Givaldik. Now, for the Ma'akev part. Well, when it comes to Shinui Kodesh, well, we had quoted these psukim at the very beginning of the daf, right? V'shachatos u'lechatos, v'lokach ha'koyin v'dam ha'chatos, v'chipra alav ha'koyin, right? So all those psukim by Chatas Chelev that are saying that the Shchita, Kabbalah, Olacha, Zrika have to be Lishma by Shinui Kodesh, that is teaching Le'akev. Amazing. Now, how do we know by Shinui Bailim Le'akev? Well, when we had said V'chiper Olav HaKoin, right, it has to be for him, and Mechataso, right, meaning we had learned out already earlier on in the daf that Zrika Sadam by Shinui Bailim is Me'akev. Now, how do we know all of the other avodas? Well, like we had learned yesterday by the Korbin Pesach from Shlomim. Well, just like by Shlomim, there was no distinction, right? We had all avodas of Shchita, Kabbalah, Halacha, Zrika were the same in terms of limitzvah. So similarly, by Shinui Bailim, by Korbin Chatas, Shchita, Kabbalah, Halacha, Zrika are the same in terms of Akev, right? They're meaning. I hope I said that right. That by Shlom they're all the same in terms of the mitzvah, and by Shinui Bailim, by Korbin Chatas, they're all the same in terms of le'akev. So be'etzem, what have we done? We have learned from Shlomim that by Shinui Kodesh and by Shinui Bailim, all of the avodas, Shita, Kabbalah, Halacha, Zrika, have to be Lishmah limitzvah. And then we learned out from the psukim that we had quoted earlier about Shchita, Kabbalah, Halacha, Zrika of Shinui Kodesh by Korbin Chatas to say that it is Me'akev, and we then similarly learn out from by Shinui Bailim, starting with Zrika that it's Me'akev, and then just like by Korbin Shlomim, all of the avodas are the same. Also by Korbin Chatas, all of the avodas are the same, and Shchita, Kabbalah, Halacha, Zrika are going to be Me'akev also by Shinui Bailim. Okay, so Hilkach mitzvah mishlamim v'anach kroi le'akev. So the mitzvah is learned from shlamim, and all the me'akev stuff is learned from the psukim by chatas. V'ashkechon chatas chelev dichsiv bal chatas. Okay, so all of these psukim that we've been working with so far from chatas or chatas chelev, right? As it says, the chatas, we're talking about a regular korban chatas davodis kochavim v'dishmias hakol uvitois v'sayim v'tumas miktas v'kodoshav tiloksebu minolan. Now, what about by Chatas Davodas Kochavim or Korbin Ole V'Yorid, like Shvuas Ha'edus or Shvuas Bitui or Tumas Mikdash V'Kodoshav? How do we know in those scenarios also Shinui Kodesh and Shinui Bailim is Me'akev? Well, Chatas Davodas Kochavim Ma'asim Chatas Chelev Shekein Koris Kimosa. Well, in terms of Chatos of Avodah Zarah being learned out from Chatos Chelev, that's easy because they're both Korban Chatases that have a chiyuv koris, so all of the same halachis apply. V'hanoch kul e mi'asun mitzad b'me hatzad. Interesting. Okay, and then all of the remaining ones, the Korbin Olav Yoreds, are learned out from basically the other korbanis of Chatos Chelev and interesting. Okay, Gewaldig. Okay, Gewaldig. Oh, does Rashi? Interesting. Okay. Gewaldig. Now, I guess that the point is, this kind of... Now, I think that we also know that all these avodas by Mitzora and Nazir are also then going to be Makiv, because we had all those psukim, right? Rabbi Shochat, Ve'osa Kohen Nesachatas, Kos Yosef, Shem Chatas, etc. Right? So we also know that by comparing Chatas to Shlomim, in those scenarios also that everything would be Me'akev. And then we learn because Rashi says, right, Mechatas Chelev v'chatas Nazir Mitzora, right? That if you, right, how do we know that also Korbin Olav Yored applies, right? This, that the Shema is Me'akev. So by Korbin Olav Yored, well, you learn it out between Chatas Chelev and Chatas Nazir Mitzora. So if you can say, well, Chatas Chelev is more stringent because it's a chiyuv kares. Yeah, but what about Chatas Mitzora, which aren't a chiyuv kares, etc. So basically, between those scenarios of the different kinds of Korban Chatases that have to be the Shema Me'akev, you'll be able to apply that to Korbin Ola V'Yored as well, to learn that the Shema is Me'akev by Korbin Ola V'Yored as well. Okay, so now we move on to the section of the Daf that discusses slaughtering a Korban Pesach not for Pesach. Okay, here we go. So let's just jump in and we'll see what this means. Taner Rabbanan episode. Pesach Bizmano Lishmo Kasher Shalom Lishmo Pasul. Okay, so Pesach Bizmano. What's Bizmano? Yudalid Beino Arbain. Erev Pesach in the afternoon. That is Bizmano. Offering a Korban Pesach on Erev Pesach in the afternoon, that is Bismanu. And during that window, so as we learned in our Mishnah, it has to be Lishmah. So this is Lishmah kosher. If it's slaughtered and the Avodah Sadan, Shchita Kabbalah, Lafa, Zika, Lishmah, kosher, Shelo Lishmah, Pasul. Uveshar Yemos Hashana, and the rest of the days of the year, when it is not the time to offer the Korbin Pesach, Lishmah, Pasul. If the Korbin Pesach, right? So let's say we're talking about Moser Pesach, right? Let's say we're talking Moser Pesach. What would that look like? Well, say you set aside a animal to be a Korbin Pesach, or let's say you set aside an animal to be a Korbin Pesach, and then you lost it. You misplaced it. So what do? So you set aside a different one. Set aside a different animal to be your Korbin Pesach, and then let's say at some point after Pesach, let's say you find the original. What do? It's Moser Pesach. It's a leftover Korbin Pesach. What do you do with it? So this Moser Pesach. So now this could also be talking about prior to Pesach, right? Let's say you had set aside the animal before Pesach, and you decided you were going to slaughter it before Pesach. It could be that also. But let's talk about Moser Pesach. It gives us one thing to talk about. Moser Pesach. You found, right? You lost your Korbin. You brought a different one. You found this one at a later point. Moser Pesach. What do you do with it? So Moser Pesach. Lishmo pasul, if it's slaughtered as a Korbin Pesach, pasul. Shelo lishmo, kosher. But if it's slaughtered not as a Korbin Pesach, kosher. And this is what we are going to discuss for the rest of today's daf, and also for quite a bit, I think, of tomorrow's daf as well. Okay. How do we know that Moser Pesach slaughtered for anything other than a Korbin Pesach is kosher? Amar Avua Dishmu, says Avua Dishmu. Omakra. The pasuk says, "Ve'im min hatzon korban lezevach shalom l'Hashem." Very, 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 very interesting drasha over here, because pashtus of the pasuk is that it's talking about a Korbin Shlom, right? Ve'im min hatzon korban lezevach shalom l'Hashem. If a person brings a Korbin Shlom from tzon, from sheep or goats. But Avua de Shmuel is an interesting drasha. His drasha is ve'im min hatzon. If we're talking about a Korbin that specifically comes from tzon, what tzon is a term that refers to both sheep and goats. So what is a Korbin that is brought specifically from sheep and goats? Korbin Pesach. So if you have a leftover Korbin Pesach, or a Korbin Pesach shelo b'zmano, Korbanu lezevach hashlomim lezevach shlom l'Hashem, it will be a Korbin Shlom. If you have Moser Pesach, if you have a leftover Korbin Pesach, it's offered as a Korbin Shlomim. Dovra abba min hatzon, something, right? A Korbin that comes from sheep, Korbin Pesach, yehei lezevach Shlomim, will be as a Korbin Shlomim. Ve'ema Shlomim in midachrina lo. Okay, maybe it has to be offered as a Shlom. What if you offer the Moser Pesach as an Ola? I'll suggest it will not work. It says lezevach Shlomim. L'Hashem has to be a Shlomim. Shlomim in midachrina lo. Omer Reb Ilo, Omer B'Yechanan lezebach. It says lezebach Shlomim. The rabbis call zevach to include all zevachs, not just Shlomim, but all of them, even olas. Ema l'chol d'shachid lavei k'mosa. Now, says the Gemara, I will suggest, okay, well, maybe if you have a Moser Pesach and you slaughter it as a Korbin Ola, it shall be a Korbin Ola. Meaning, as opposed to, you slaughter it as a Korbin Ola, but it's still a Shlomim. Kilu, anything that you offer a Moser Pesach as, right, as so long as it is not a Pesach, you can't offer it as a Pesach. You could offer it as anything else, and if you offer it as anything else, it's automatically a Shlomim. But maybe I'll suggest that it'll be whatever you offer it as. You offer it as an Ola, it's an Ola. If it said Lishlomim v'zevach, sure. But look, you could slaughter it as any Korbin, but it will be a Shlomim. You have this Moser Pesach, and you slaughter it as a Ola, it'll be a Shlomim. Ema liz. So now the Gemara suggests, wait a second. Why don't we say that this is klal ufratu klal? Interesting. We were saying lezevach shlamim that you could slaughter Moser Pesach as any kind of korban and it will automatically be a shlamim. Now the Gemara gets fancy. They say, wait a second, but maybe this is a klal ufratu klal situation. Ema lezevach klal, right? Any kind of korban, that's a klal. Shlamim, prat. A shlamim is a specific kind of korban. Klal ufrat, ein b'klal ela masha b'frat. And so far, right, we only pointed out a klal and a frat. So if you have a klal and a prat, as we know, a klal followed by a prat, the klal is entirely restricted to the prat. So if we said all korbanos, and then we say shlamim, it means only a shlam. Shlamim in midachin alo, only a shlam. But la Hashem hadar v'chala. But when it says the zevach shlamim la Hashem, it is now once again going broad. We had broad, specific, broad. Zevach, broad. Shlamim, specific. La Hashem, broad. Well, we're going to expand on this now in the next few lines. Maskef Rabbi Yaakov min Abkod. Rabbi Yaakov min Abkod asks, Halodami klala basu l'chlala kama. Right? Did we saw this already, right? I believe that we already saw this. Lodami klala kama, because we said the first klal was all. I don't remember. Did we not already see this structure? I feel like we saw it earlier. But anyways. So this structure, maybe this is the first one, maybe I don't know what's what. Anyways, so Yaakov ben Abkod says, but wait a second. How come? Because the first klal is unlike the second klal. How come? In what way? Well, klal kama marbe zvachim v'sulo. The first klal of zevach is only talking about zevachs. What's the examples of zevachs? A cow, a sheep, a goat, slaughtering things. Marbe zvachim v'sulo klal basra, but la Hashem, kol de la Hashem, vafilu ofis, vafilu menochis. La Hashem means anything for Hashem. There's more things that could be for Hashem than just cows, sheep, and goats. For example, flour, minchas. For example, birds. So the zevach and the lashem are different. Zevach is only animals. Lashem includes also birds and flour. Hatanit ve'bishmal bechlali ufrate darish ke'agavna. Yeah, but there's the Tanit Rabbi Shmuel who says that you can even learn this as a klal ufrat uklal. So, that being the case, klal ufrat uklal yitadan ela keina prat. So as we know, when you have a klal ufrat uklal, how does that work? Well, the result is going to be similar to the prat. So not limited to the prat, not only a shlamim, but things that are similar to a shlamim. Ma prat meforish shu shelo lishmo v'kosher. Well, just like the prat is not a Korbin Pesach, a shlamim is not a Korbin Pesach, and it's kosher. Right? We're talking about Moser Pesach, and we're saying that it's offered as a shlamim. Shlamim is not a Korbin Pesach, and it's kosher. Av kol shu shelo lishmo v'kosher. Well, so long as it is not a Korbin Pesach, it will be kosher. So long as it will not be a Korbin Pesach, it will be kosher. Ima prat meforish dova b'neder uvinedova. I've called ba b'neder uvinedova. Yeah, but we could say that shlamim is something that can be brought as a neder or as an edova. So maybe when you have a Moser Pesach, it would have to be offered as something that could be offered as a neder or nedava. Ola v'shlamim in. So for example, if you slaughter the Moser Pesach as an ola or as a shlamim, fine. Chatas v'asham lo. But not if it was offered as if it was slaughtered as a chatos or an asham, because chatos and ashams don't come as neders or nedavas. So now we were saying earlier that lezevach shlamim, it could be any type of korban, even a chatas and asham, right? You have Moser Pesach slaughtered as a asham. it'll just default to being a shlomim, but that'll be fine. But now we want to say that maybe the zevach shlomim l'Hashem, maybe it's klal ufrad uklal. It's similar to the shlomim, in that shlomim is offered as a, right, in that shlomim can be offered as a neder and dover, not a chatas or asham. Now the Gemara says something really interesting. Chaver, you ready for something really interesting? The Gemara answers, Ela lezevach ribuyahu. And we'll stop with this, even though it's in the middle. But if we don't stop here, we're going to go about 2/3 of the way through the next Amud. So we'll stop here, and that's fine. But who could tell me what the Gemara says? Anybody want to explain to us what the Gemara says over here? The Gemara says, forget about klal ufrad. This is not klal ufrad uklal. Extremely interesting stuff. This is not klal ufrad uklal. How come? Because klal ufrad uklal is a sort of structure of a pasuk, right? So if you have, for example, let me see if I can remember it. V'tzarta kesef biyadecha v'nasata kesef b'chol asher does the pasuk even say b'chol asher taveh nafshecha? Okay, b'bakar v'tzon b'yayin v'shecher uve'chol. I can't even remember. But do I have another example of a? Dang. What's another example? Wait, no, I surely looked this up. Wait, 1 second. So the pasuk says by Meiser Sheni, they'll bring it, the Meiser Sheni to Yerushalayim. It says v'nasata kesef b'chol asher tayv nafshecha b'bakol v'tzon v'yayin v'shecha v'chol asher tishalcha nafshecha. That's what I was thinking. No, so if we look at that structure of the pasuk, v'nasata kesef b'chol asher tayv nafshecha. Right, so you have your Meiser Sheni, and you've redeemed it onto money, and you bring that money to Yerushalayim, and it says, what can you spend that money on in Yerushalayim? So it says, whatever you want. That's clearly a klal. All of a sudden, we're telling you what to spend it on. Cattle, sheep, wine, beer. So now it's specific. We're talking about whatever you want. All of a sudden we're going broad again. Right? First we said, right, whatever you want. Then we said specifically bakar, tzon, yain, shecher. Then we said whatever you want again. So what do we say? So that's key. There's no chidushim. There's nothing extra in the pasuk. There's no missing words or extra words, whatever. It's simply a sentence structure. The sentence structure is, it started broad, it went specific, it became broad again. As opposed to our case over here of lezevach shlomim, zevach is completely extra, right? The pasuk could just say, "Vim benatzon korbanul lishlomim." Lezevach is extra, and because it's extra, it's coming to teach that it could be any kind of korban. This is not the place to start saying, "Oh, this is a klal ufrad uklal." This isn't a klal ufrad uklal. This is an extra word. Klal ufrad uklal is when you have there's nothing extra in the pasuk. There's just we analyze the pasuk. We say, wow, there's clearly a pattern over here, and we do a pattern recognition. We says, well, it's broad, it's specific, it's broad. That's a klal ufrad uklal. This is not a klal ufrad uklal. This is an extra word. Now that we have the extra word, don't say, oh, well, now that we have the extra word, let's say it's a klal ufrad uklal. No, one thing at a time. We have this extra word, which is not necessary, but we have it. L'zevach. Zevach is coming to teach that it could be any kind of korban. Full stop. Okay, so it could be any kind of korban. Chaver, we are going to stop here in the middle. But again, if we don't stop here, then it's going to be a while until we stop. So let us just do that. I think that this may have been at finally under an hour or something. These dafs have been insane recently. I think that this is actually, how long have I been recording for? Less than an hour. Wow. Finally, would you look at that? Well, Chaver, that was daf ches of Pesach Zevachim. Oh, wow, I almost forgot what it's like to record for less than an hour. Oh my gosh, Pesach Zevachim has been a piece of work. Okay, the daf began with Korbin Chatas' Lishmah requirement, Beseder, right? Again, yesterday we learned how we know that Korbin Pesach has to be Lishmah, and otherwise it's possible. We did the same thing today for Korbin Chatas, that a Korbin Chatas needs to be Lishmah, and otherwise it's going to be possible. We then learned out that slaughtering a Korbin Pesach not for Pesach, right? There's of course a very specific window to slaughter a Korbin Pesach, that is the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon. If you slaughter the Korbin Pesach any other time, so it's possible if slaughtered as a Korbin Pesach, but if it's slaughtered for any other Korbin, it'll default to being a shlomim, and that will be kosher. And of course, we're in the middle of that sugya. We will pick up in mid-sugya tomorrow. Chevra, enjoy the vacation day. Have a great day. Cheers.